The clergy sex abuse crisis continues to unfold here in the U.S., and Rome maintains its silence. Will the accusations and scandalous behavior ever be properly addressed or investigated? Attorney and former National Review Board member Robert Bennett is here with analysis. And tens of thousands of Catholic women are making their voices heard in a letter demanding Pope Francis answer the Vigano allegations. Moral theologian Dr. Janet Smith and journalist ALEXANDRA DESANCTIS tell us why they signed on. And finally, in a media-saturated world, can poetry still reach and inspire children? We'll get story-ended with poet and author Matthew Mehan. The World Over begins right now. A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. How do you like that new open? It only took years and years, but there it is. Looks nice. Robert Bennett, Janet Smith, ALEXANDRA DESANCTIS, and Matthew Mehan are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. We have a very important show for you this evening. But first, some news from the world over. Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh faced a final round of questioning from the Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday, despite 3 days of chaos and protests propagated by Democrat senators and demonstrators. President Donald Trump's nominee appears well on his way to confirmation. Democrats lack the votes to stop the nominee. Kavanaugh was pressed to reveal his views on abortion rights, gun control, voting rights, and other issues, but to no avail. Despite the partisan protests and banter throughout the hearing, Kavanaugh testified that partisanship has no place at the High Court.
The Supreme Court must never be viewed as a partisan institution. The justices on the Supreme Court do not sit on opposite sides of an aisle. They do not caucus in separate rooms. If confirmed to the Supreme Court, I would be part of a team of 9, committed to deciding cases according to the Constitution and laws of the United States.
And the panel of prominent lay Catholics who investigated clerical abuse some 15 years ago on behalf of the U.S. Bishops' Conference want a new appointment, this time to investigate the bishops themselves. As first reported by the Chicago Sun-Times, a letter sent to USCCB President Cardinal Daniel DiNardo on behalf of the 9-member National Review Board offering their services for a Vatican-appointed independent inquiry board was submitted this week. Their proposed charge? To investigate alleged cover-ups by the U.S. church hierarchy and abuse by bishops. The board was blocked from such investigations when it was created in 2002. The members are also seeking specifically to know, quote, why Archbishop Theodore McCarrick and others rose in their ecclesiastical careers when troubling facts regarding sexual abuse were known by the hierarchy which promoted them. Joining me now with analysis and his unique perspective on this abuse crisis, I'm joined by famed attorney and former member of the U.S. Bishops' National Review Board, Robert Bennett. Bob, thank you so much
Raymond.
for being here. Pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start with 15 years ago. You were appointed to the USCCB board in the midst of a very similar crisis. Now you and members of that initial group are submitting a letter to Cardinal DiNardo asking to be reinstated. You're offering something called a lay independent inquiry board. Why? What is that?
Because the church can't handle this itself. And we are all outraged about what we're seeing and hearing. And we feel with our unique experience, we could be of assistance to the church.
What form would this take? I know Ann Burke signed on, Leon Panetta, former CIA director, you, of course, who were at the very tip of the spear investigating these dioceses 15 years ago.
Yes.
What What form do you see this lay group taking?
Well, the way I would see it would be this board would hire an investigator. I could be that if they so choose, because that's what we did last time. And I would put a team together and investigate. And I think you absolutely need some first-rate accounting, forensic accounting entity involved to follow the money, as
I've been asking for this for months.
as they say, because that's you got to follow the money.
To root out the corruption ongoing today, rather than something that happened decades and decades ago.
Yes, we're talking about today, and I mean, the phrase is sometimes overdone, but there is really this gigantic tumor, this cancer in the church now, and it's been allowed to metastasize. And once and for all, we've got to do something. Now, that's not to say that we feel very confident that we did a good job, and children and my own grandchildren are in Catholic schools.
Yeah.
Children are much safer today
Yeah.
than they have ever been. But under the directions and rules of our board, our mission, bishops were kind of off limits. You know, it's my understanding that under canon law, before you investigate a bishop, you need the Pope to authorize it.
So the Holy See would have to be involved in the authorization of this lay inquiry board.
Yes, that's my understanding, and that's what I understand. And even if it wasn't required, you're not going to get any place unless the Holy Father decides once and for all to do it. And I think it is just critical. The questions that I'm asked, because many people know I've been involved in this, is how can someone like, I hesitate to say, my dear friend Cardinal McCarrick, who was a close friend of mine, how could he rise so high in the church when now we know that there were many people who knew about sexual abuse, maybe not dozens and dozens of young people, but sleeping with all sorts of...
With adult seminarians and
Seminarians.
Yeah, now teens. There's a
over whom he had
11-year-old.
enormous power.
Yeah.
So that has to be examined. How in the church can... And there are others.
You must have been devastated when you heard that
I
news.
was devastated, and I'm still devastated. Over, there must be many more, and I don't know how many more, but we have to find out how people got to where they are when the church had records of wrongdoing, of sexual abuse.
Tell me, refresh the memory of our audience, some of whom this is all new to them. When you were investigating and went diocese to diocese, you had a small team that went in. It was at the discretion of the bishop whether he wanted to share files with you or not. The audits became a problem, Bob, weren't they? Getting that information, getting the diocese to give you that information.
It wasn't only the audits. One of the bishops refused to have the National Review Board, which was picked by the Bishops' Conference, to let us in the front door. He wouldn't talk to us. Nobody's going to come into my territory, was essentially what he said.
I want to show you something. This is Wilton Gregory. Archbishop Wilton Gregory was president of the USCCB at the time. And this is he announcing the findings of the review board and responding to the John Jay report in 2004. Listen to this.
The picture that emerges, sadly, is one of those who broke faith with their people, their priesthood, and their religious vows, to use their sacred position to prey on the young and the vulnerable. We also see reflected in the John Jay study and the board's report the fault of church leaders who fail to appreciate and effectively act on the gravity of the abuse problem. I am sure bishops will carefully consider this recommendation as an important element in preventing abuse and never again permitting the problem to overwhelm us as it did. As far as it is humanly possible to know such things, I assure you that known offenders are not in the ministry. I can say with absolute assurance that the bishops now have in place the means of responding immediately to allegations, assisting victims, and removing offenders from ministry. The terrible history recorded here today is history.
Robert Bennett, watching that, how could he have been so wrong?
Well, you know, the church operates in secrecy. I can tell you, as diligent as we were, we did not know. We were sort of cut off at the bishop's level. We noted pretty forcefully in our report that a lot of the problems were that the bishops did not respond appropriately, but we couldn't investigate the bishops.
You were walled off from them.
We were pretty much walled off.
So this lay board that you're now proposing be renewed and re-empaneled, this would have investigatory power of the bishops themselves.
Yes, but it would require practically, and I think under canon law, it would require the okay or support of the Holy Father.
What was the investigation like last time? Was it constant stonewalling? Was it a constant series of obstacles? And what did you find when you went to present your findings to Rome?
There was a lot of stonewalling. There were other places that there wasn't stonewalling, but there wasn't much we could do about it if somebody wanted to stonewall it. I had to chase a couple of the hierarchy all over to get them to sit down and talk to the board. Going to Rome was a very unique experience. Ann Burke, who's a appellate court judge, Supreme Court judge in Chicago, and Bill Burley, who is a very noted Catholic layman and
Head of
newspaperman. Yeah, the three of us went to Rome, and we met with then Cardinal Ratzinger, who I don't know if it was a year later or 8 months later became Pope Benedict, and it was very clear that he was interested, and we had a 2-hour meeting with him. 2 hours, and he took notes. He had trouble with English, but he took notes, and at the end of it, he read the notes back, and I had the ability or talent to write notes like he did, I would have done much better in law school. It just amazed me. He got everything. He got it.
And he would go on to laicize about 800 priests.
Well, interestingly, when we left the meeting, all three of us felt that we were telling Benedict things that he had never heard before. And we all had the feeling that he was looking to us to tell him the truth because his own bishops were not. Now, he never said that. I want to make that
I understand.
That's clear.
What do you make? We heard from Cardinal Wuerl, who was mentioned in the Vigano testimony. Archbishop Vigano, former Vatican ambassador, made explosive charges about a week ago. Archbishop Wuerl, then Archbishop Wuerl, now Cardinal Wuerl, claims he knew nothing of McCarrick, the settlements, everything that went on. And he also made the point, as other bishops have, that most of this, 98% of this stuff that we're hearing today, it all happened in the past. Yet just this week, Bob, we hear reports from Miami of 2 priests caught in a sexual act in public, in a car. Children and women were passing by. They had to call authorities to arrest these 2 guys. They were 2 priests from Chicago. There are other stories of closures of something called the Casa Jesus in Chicago, where there was a subculture going on and people going to bars, and the rector had porn on his laptop. Stuff is happening right now. How do you deal with what's happening today, contemporaneously? How do you do it?
Well, you do it with a very strong independent board, a board that, while it doesn't have subpoena power, it's made clear that unless people cooperate with us, there's going to be trouble. There's going to be none of this nonsense of hiding records or not making them available. Yeah. And then once you identify the people, the clergy has to, hierarchy has to do something with them. And,
or be held accountable to the public and authorities.
Or be held accountable.
There are stories today, the Archbishop of Omaha is opening up his files. He's cooperating with the Nebraska AG. Meanwhile, the Attorney General in New York is subpoenaing all of the files of the dioceses in his locale. This is going to cascade. I said the first domino fell after Pennsylvania. We're seeing the dominoes fall quickly. How would this lay board interact, and what would be its function if you've got entrepreneurial AGs all over the country opening these files?
Well, I think that you would have to work together. I think that the AGs would find it comforting to know that the church had an experienced, I was a federal prosecutor, I was one of them, that there would be a legitimate church investigation. I don't think it would mean that they would say, well, we're not interested anymore.
Right.
But I think they would be, for the most part, happy to, happy to work together. But it might help stem the tide of every attorney general. If you're in a state where they have limited resources,
right,
they would be very happy if our board would do it rather than them. But if there's no board like ours, they're going to do it.
Right. I want to play something for you. Father Richard John Newhouse, whom we talked about earlier, who was very complimentary of your work on the National Review Board in the wake of the reports. Initially, he was suspicious, but after the fact, he thought you did a great service to the church. Richard Newhouse felt this was a crisis of fidelity, and I asked him back in 2003 if he thought merely reteaching the faith, what the church taught, was enough to restore confidence in the bishops. Here's what he said.
This is going to take a long time, and I agree with everybody who wishes the church well, that out of this eventually is going to come great renewal, purification, but the purification has to come before the renewal, and purification doesn't come without a lot of pain, and we haven't begun to experience the full pain of this. This is by no means over. There's worse coming down the pike.
More bishops leaving office?
It's going to go on and on. It's quite possibly bishops leaving office, criminal actions against bishops, quite possibly.
How prophetic.
How prophetic. He was way ahead of the curve on this thing.
Yes, he was.
Do you think we're going to see more bishops prosecuted as a result of what's happening across the country, both with these grand juries and the AG action, as well as what you're suggesting, a lay inquiry board?
Well, I think so, but I don't know how many. That's the problem. We don't know how many. How many or how much or how deep it goes. But I think one of the questions that has to be answered is how does someone like Father McCarrick get to the level he gets to in the church?
With full knowledge, with people knowing the settlements have been paid.
Yeah, well, now we didn't know that on our board.
Right.
That was kept from us. I don't mean it was there to be found.
Right.
I mean it was kept from us.
Yeah.
So that has to be answered, because if it isn't, the bishops and the cardinals are going to lose whatever influence they have over the Catholic layman. You've probably noticed in the last few years, nobody worries about what the Catholic Church thinks about the various social issues. I remember growing up as a young Catholic boy in Catholic schools, whether it be abortion or the death penalty or whatever. The governors and the senators and the congressmen, they all wanted to know what's the position of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church, they were the moral leadership in the world. Now, people say, well, they can't even get their own house in order.
Bob, you were a prosecutor. You deal with cases like this every day. 90%, I think, of investigating anything or finding a solution lies in identifying the problem. In 2002, the problem clearly was abuse of minors, as you mentioned earlier. The protocols put in place in 2004, it solved a lot of that. Kids are really safe in the Catholic environment today.
Yes.
What we're talking about, the stories we're seeing spill forward, are abuse of young adults, seminarians, and teenagers. Primarily men attacking men, preying on men.
Right.
Is that the heart of what ails us now?
I think it may well be, yes. Yeah, I don't think that it would make a whole lot of sense to go back and revisit what I think were, we didn't find every case.
Right.
But we found so much.
Right.
And we got so many positive things in that every day children are safer and safer.
Right.
But now I think our focus has to be on the bishops.
The Vigano report, Archbishop Vigano claims that the allegations he made, that the Pope knew of McCarrick sanctions and lifted them, that Cardinal Wuerl knew and stopped a meeting with seminarians, moved McCarrick out of his residence, all of that he thinks is circumstantial evidence that his allegations are true. He claims to prove this. You can look at the files at the Secretariat of State and at the Nunciature in Washington, D.C. Do you think we will ever see those files, that the Church will make those available?
Well, I'm the eternal optimist. I think if the Holy Father makes it clear that this has to be done, then the chances of that happening are very good. But, going way back, when I was just starting on this, we wanted to talk to some of the folks in Rome, some of the cardinals. And, the Church has protocol after protocol. And I was told, well, you just can't go contact somebody in Rome. You've got to go to the apostolic delegate. And we went to the apostolic delegate, and he didn't even deign to respond directly. He had one of his aides respond to say the nuncio says this is not within his jurisdiction. And I said, excuse me, the abuse of children is not within his jurisdiction. So anyway, I sent a bunch of faxes, and they were answered. And Cardinal Ratzinger's office sent me an email. I'm sorry, those days it was all faxing. Sent me a fax back. Well, come on to Rome. And we had a wonderful meeting with Benedict. And then I was later told that I violated the norms of sending faxes. I said, well,
we needed answers.
But I got one back.
Right.
He didn't seem to be offended.
Vigano has made some pretty explosive charges against several of his fellow bishops as well as the Pope himself. He's calling for the Pope's resignation if these facts can be borne out, if these charges prove true. Do you think the Pope should resign if the evidence shows and demonstrates that he knew?
Raymond, it's very difficult to know at this point. It's not simply if certain things were done, it's why were they done? What is the whole picture? I mean, we don't know that now. But if it ever were determined that the Holy Father, I'm scared to death to even say this, that lightning may strike me. If the Holy Father participated in hiding this kind of stuff, yes, I think he should resign. No one is above the law. But
and only those files are going to tell us that's true.
Yeah, we're a far cry from knowing that. I think there's one other very important point that really underscores why, if not our board, a board like ours has to do this. And that is that we cannot allow any investigation to become a football in a power play. This is not about cleansing the church of homosexuality. It's not about Vatican II. It's not about
Power struggles in the Curia. No, it's got to be about answering these charges.
It's got to be answering these charges, and then
discovering the truth, and you let the chips fall.
and let the chips fall. That's
What do you make of Legatus? This is an international group of CEOs, esteemed CEOs, led and founded by Tom Monahan. Today they announced they are withholding their annual tithe donation to the Vatican, putting it in escrow pending transparency and knowledge of exactly where those dollars will be used. Is that a legitimate approach for moneyed Catholics across the country and the world?
Yes, I think he and his colleagues are to be congratulated. And I would, as self-serving as this sounds, I think it's people like that that have to help finance this thing. Because if on the one hand you have the Vatican and the powerful people there, you know, you need some money to hire the right experts.
Yeah, and open the right doors.
And open the right doors, and you know, to get the right accountants to look at this thing, follow the money, and that's expensive. I can't tell you the amount of money that my law firm, to its credit, wrote off. I wrote off, I think I told you, close to $2 million.
Back in 2002.
Yeah, because we were not being paid at all. But we, you know, and other members of the board, I'm sure, wrote off a lot. Now, I had to do the investigation.
Yeah.
So my team, you know, and I had a very narrow team, small team.
Yeah.
But I would like to see this done right.
Yeah. Do you think, final question, any response from the Bishops' Conference from Cardinal DiNardo, whom you addressed your letter and request to?
The letter was sent by Ann Burke. I have not heard from her today. I would have heard from her today if she got a response. Thus far, we've gotten no response.
Can the Church, can the Pope wait this out in silence, which is his preferred approach? Publicly, he said it during homilies and on the plane back from Rome when these allegations fell. He said, I'm not going to say a word about this. Can he do that and maintain credibility?
Well, of course he can do it, but he would lose a lot of credibility and a wonderful opportunity to once and for all change this and restore the reputation of the Church. He should not let that happen.
Robert Bennett, thank you for being here. I do hope that the bishops empanel a lay inquiry board like yours. I think you're the A team. You've done this before. And you know what? All the people who are offering their services have not only real credentials, but they've investigated this before. They know some of the pitfalls and the problems. It would go, I think, a long way to restoring lay confidence if a group like yours was impaneled. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Raymond.
Robert Bennett's In the Ring, The Trials of a Washington Lawyer by Bob is available everywhere in bookstores and online. Dr. Janet Smith and Alexandra DeSanctis are up next, but first, a little more news. The embattled Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, was received by Pope Francis in Rome this past week amid the continuing dual controversy of his alleged handling of clerical abuse and his alleged knowledge of abuse by Archbishop Theodore McCarrick, his predecessor. As reported by the Washington Post, Wuerl told priests at a closed-door meeting on Monday that he asked the Holy Father how he should move forward, and the Pope told him he should discern what to do with his priests. According to the Post, the clergy were split as to whether the cardinal should resign or whether he is to blame at all. One camp feels the public damage to Wuerl is irreversible and past the point of no return. The other believes that Wuerl should stick it out and hopes he can help move the Church into a new phase. Having already passed the age of 75, Wuerl had to proffer his resignation to the Vatican 2 years ago. The Pope has not yet accepted that resignation. There are also calls this week for Pope Francis to cancel the Youth Synod planned for October and replace it with an extraordinary meeting of bishops to address the clergy sex abuse crisis, abuse of power, and accountability. Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia and British Bishop Philip Egan have already asked the Pope to convene such a synod. This week, Dallas Bishop Edward Burns added his voice to the call. In a letter posted on the diocese website, Burns and other leaders in the diocese urged the Pope to call an extraordinary synod to find real solutions to the heinous issue of clergy abuse of minors. And silence, that is Pope Francis's prescription for confronting allegations of clerical abuse and those critical of the Church's hierarchy's handling of the crisis. During his Monday homily at the Vatican's Sancta Marta Chapel, he recommended silence and prayer to deal with, quote, people who don't have goodwill, who seek only scandal, who want only division, who seek only destruction, including within the family, end quote. He continued, the truth is humble, the truth is silent. The Pope concluded his homily praying, may the Lord give us the grace to discern when we should speak and when we should stay silent. Joining me now with their insights as Catholic women on this abuse crisis are Dr. Janet Smith, professor of moral theology at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, and staff writer for National Review, ALEXANDRA DESANCTIS. Both are signatories of a letter urging Pope Francis to answer the allegations raised by former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., Carlo Maria Vigano. Thank you both for being here.
You're welcome.
Dr. Smith, I want to start with you. Why did you feel it important to be a part of this petition effort, and what is the reasoning here?
Oh, I think that it's very clear that women need to speak especially clearly. I mean, people tend to listen to women more these days, and we take advantage of that. Many of these women are professional women, and the others are those who are totally devoted to their Catholic faith, to raising their children in the church, and they're becoming concerned about sending their sons into the seminary and having their kids go to Catholic schools, even, you know, work at the parish. Can their children, are their children safe, and are their sons safe, not their adult sons safe? So I think that our voice carries a special weight in this question.
In the letter, Alexandra, I'll direct this to you. You and tens of thousands of women who've already signed it call Francis's response to the Vigano allegations inadequate and implore him to deliver a direct response. As you heard in our headline, the Pope says silence and prayer are the best answers. Today, during a homily, he said, quote, a sign that a Christian does not know how to blame oneself is when they are used to accusing others, to badmouth others, to stick their nose in other people's lives. It's a bad sign, he said. Is that what you think Vigano has done here? Has he stuck his nose into other people's affairs?
You know, I really don't think so. And based on a lot of the reporting that we've seen in the wake of what he wrote, it seems that he's a very credible person, and he should be taken seriously. And I think the idea that Pope Francis is going to remain silent is a mistake, honestly, because if any of this is untrue, then Catholics have a right to know that, and it should be very easy for Pope Francis to simply say, look, this is not based in fact, this didn't happen, you know, here's what really happened, and if that's the case, then I would like to know that as well.
Mm-hmm. Janet, how are Catholic women reacting to these non-answers essentially by the Vatican, and are we missing the boat by defining this crisis as merely the abuse of minors? I'm seeing that in a lot of the letters and statements by bishops across the country and the world.
Well, yes, I think women are extremely frustrated. As I said, we really need answers. And it's not, as you said, it's not just about minors. I'm one of those that I'm obviously very concerned about what's been done with McCarrick, the cover-up. I'm very concerned about bishops who have abused people. But I'm also very concerned about the presence of active homosexuals in the priesthood, and some of them who have even formed a kind of what's called a gay or lavender mafia in dioceses and kind of run the diocese. I think this is something that has been overlooked for decades and decades, Many of these men were formed in very corrupt seminaries, and they have been felt that they were given a license to prey on young men and to engage in sexual relationships with other men, sometimes fellow priests. And until we get that cleaned up, we are not going to have the church that Jesus wants us to have, one that teaches the fullness of faith and one in which the priests are models of the moral behavior that Jesus wants.
I want to quote a bit of this letter for the audience, and of course you can go online and read it. I'll give you the address in a moment. You all write, "To your herding flock, Pope Francis, your words are inadequate. They sting, reminiscent of the clericalism you so recently condemned. We need leadership, truth, and transparency. We, your flock, deserve your answers now," end quote. Now, some say the Pope is just trying to stay above the unsavory nature of these allegations. Others claim he's avoiding Vigano's charges. What do you think's going on here, Alexandra?
You know, I'm not really sure. I can't speak to why Pope Francis is taking this tack, but at first I thought maybe he was keeping silence as sort of the Vatican attempted to come up with the best possible way of coming out with what the actual truth is and explaining it to Catholics who really want answers. But at this point, I'm left to think, you know, they're kind of hoping that this will all blow over and people will stop talking about it and the news cycle will move on. And I think that's a huge mistake. And people, at least based on the people I know and the people I've talked to, that's not going to happen. People want to know the truth from the Holy Father, and rightly so.
Janet Smith, why will the Pope answer you when he wouldn't answer 5 cardinals who wrote a dubia and thousands of people who petitioned him to answer those questions of basic faith and morality?
I don't know, but I do know that it seems to me that he owes this to the Catholic people. He has asked for transparency. It seems to me he's not just in conflict with us, he's in conflict with himself. And this is really a time, I mean, the church has had a time, and there are times when it's right to keep secrets. But this is not that time. This is a time for what one of my good friends, Pia de Saleni, calls radical transparency. As I said, the bishops in the U.S. have to go through their files and find out what kind of accusations have been made against priests that in engaging in sexual affairs, maybe even with consensual sexual affairs, but ones that involve the priests breaking their vows and not being an adequate model to what Christ wants. I think that this could so easily be settled. Again, all the Holy Father has to say is, let's open those documents that Vigano says are available to us, and go into them and find it out. Ask a few questions of the key cardinals that are mentioned there. This is not difficult to do. And it would be an amazing example to the rest of the episcopacies all over the world that we no longer want to hide these things. We no longer want to protect wrongdoers. And even if it means we're going to have a radically reduced priesthood, and I fear in some places that will be the case, that we'd rather have a faithful clergy than a corrupt clergy.
I want to quote the letter again. It says, "Our hearts are broken, our faith tested by the escalating crisis engulfing our beloved church. We are angry, betrayed, and disillusioned. The pain and suffering of the victims never ends as each news cycle brings more horrific revelations of sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, cover-up, and deceit, even at the church's highest levels." Alexandra, do you have any confidence that the Pope or the Vatican are willing to authorize the opening of those files, similar to what I asked Bob Bennett earlier? Do you think they're at the place where they feel a need to open up those files and get real answers for the people?
You know, if they don't feel that need at this point, I'm not sure what would cause them to start thinking that there is a need. And after that Pennsylvania report, I thought it was very clear we needed an investigation like that to take place in every diocese in the entire United States. And then once this testimony obviously was released, even more so, I want to know, and Catholics want to know and deserve to know, who in the Catholic hierarchy, who knew what and when, and what did they do about it? And if that's not going to happen at this point, I'm really not sure what else could happen between now and later that would cause them to think suddenly it's necessary.
What are your peers telling you, Alexandra? What are young Catholics saying about this?
I think, you know, most Catholics that I know are very concerned that people within the Catholic Church, leaders who they trusted, could possibly have been covering things like this up. We want to know what has actually taken place and what was done about it. But on top of that, I think a lot of young people are concerned about how this compromises the moral witness of the church and how this will make it more difficult for us to speak about the truths of the Catholic faith and to attract people to it, when at the same time we have to somehow explain why the church is handling this terrible scandal in this way.
Janet Smith, how should the bishops respond now? I mean, they have no power to discipline their fellow bishops. Only the Holy See has that power. And look, you're familiar, probably more than anyone on this panel and maybe more than anyone I know, with the culture of seminaries. There seems to be a sexually active, predatory culture at some of these seminaries. Is it ongoing, and how do you root that out?
Well, I think it has been rooted out in many seminaries. I think that since the abuse crisis, certainly at our seminary, Sacred Heart Major Seminary, I think enormous measures have been taken. And you can visibly see it in the young men. They are masculine, they are confident, they are outgoing. It's hard to see that they could be engaging in any kind of homosexual life. The same with the faculty, the priest faculty. There just seems to be a zealousness, and I think this has been very much a concern of Archbishop Vingrome to have a very trustworthy seminary. I think every seminary, virtually every seminary in the United States has improved. I don't think all of them have improved as much as they should. But in our own Archdiocese of Detroit, we had one of the worst seminaries back in the 80s and 90s. And I'm still concerned about the products that came out of that seminary. How are they treating the young priest? Did they learn something in the seminary that was actually vicious and adopted vicious behavior? And you mentioned about the bishops. I think the bishops, any bishop should be asking for an audit of the seminaries to which they send their seminarians. They should make certain that their seminaries are squeaky clean. But they also have to go through their own files. They don't need Rome's permission to ask for an audit of the seminaries, nor do they need Rome's permission to look in their own files to see if there have been complaints against priests that they have failed to act upon. Again, mostly the bishops have said in the past, a man's private life is his private life, and all I have are rumors, and I don't really have evidence, and I want to say, get evidence. It can be done, and it needs to be done.
It seems, and it's even in the contemporary setting, when you look at the McCarrick situation, when you look at other priests who were advanced or returned to ministry, the Pope himself restored a Monsignor Rica, who was made head of the Vatican Bank after he was, there were requests to laicize him and remove him from ministry. And then after he was removed from the Vatican Bank, he's now head of the household that the Pope lives in, the Santa Marta house. So there's this kind of, I think in the name of mercy, a willingness to look the other way if these sexual acting out and these sexual behaviors didn't involve minors. But should we be more attentive to that? When a priest breaks his vows, should that be grounds for removing him from the priesthood? Alexandra DeSantis.
Oh, I think it matters very much, and obviously, to abuse the sexual abuse of a child is beyond the pale and something, we really should be foremost concerned about. But at the same time, I think all Catholics expect their priests to be abiding by the vows that they took in the same way that, lay people are abiding by, if they're married, their vows, or they're living a chaste life as a single person. That's what Catholics are called to do, whatever their state in life. And so the idea that we can kind of turn a blind eye to a particular kind of unfaithfulness is, I think, not something I want our Catholic hierarchy to be taken seriously, or a view I want them to be taking.
I know this petition you all wrote are demanding answers, and literally tens of thousands of women have joined you, and I know many, many more will in the days ahead. This all brings to mind, and Janet, you mentioned it, that this may mean a dwindling of the number of priests in some dioceses. It may even mean a smaller church. And it brought to mind something that then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger told me back in 2003 when I asked him about his vision of the new springtime of the church. Many may have forgotten this. Watch.
My idea is that really the springtime of the church will not say that we will have in a near time masses of conversions, that all people of the world will be converted to Catholicism. This is not the way of God. But we will have really convinced communities with elan of the faith, no? And this is springtime. If new life in very convince persons with the joy of the faith.
But smaller numbers.
See, smaller numbers, I think, but from these small numbers, we will have a radiation of joy in the world.
Your reaction to that, Janet Smith?
Oh, I'm sure that's the case, honestly. Again, in the seminary, after the Dallas Charter and the directive from Rome that men who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies cannot be admitted to the seminary, we had an influx of the most beautiful masculine men you can imagine. And it was, finally they felt safe in the seminary. They felt that they weren't going into a homosexual priesthood. Well, I'm sorry that some of them still find out, not necessarily in this diocese, but in some dioceses, that they're going into a homosexual priesthood where they will still be preyed upon, and there'll be, you know, the gay mafia will thwart so much their progress in their career, but their progress in teaching the faith, that they will be slapped down whenever they teach orthodoxy. When you get these, I'm calling them gay Harvey Weinstein priests, all right? Men who are really misusing their power and going after other males. And this harms people no matter what age they are, certainly worse with children, but believe me, it's incredibly harmful for an adult. Once we get them out of the priesthood, you are going to have so many more healthy men go into the priesthood. I mean, even in today's current climate, even at the most pessimistic estimations, it's the claim that at least 50% of priests are faithful to their vows of celibacy. I'm sure in many dioceses it's closer to 95%, all right? Mm-hmm. That means it is possible. That means it is possible. And we have to find those men for whom it is possible, that they want to be an alter Christus. Mm-hmm. Christ himself was a celibate. And it's very hard to do on a natural plane. But the church has an abundance of graces and an abundance of techniques, if you will, if you want to call it that. But, you know, receiving the sacraments, reading the liturgy, going on retreats, those who stay close to those things are going to find it hard to stray. I mean, they'll still have temptations, a lot of powerful temptations.
Why do you think so many women are coming forward and signing this letter? And what will happen if the Vatican, if the Pope simply ignores it?
You know, one of the few heartening things that's come out of this entire scandal, starting from earlier this summer, was just how passionate I think so many lay Catholics are about renewing the church, and women feel especially strongly, I think, that the church is supposed to be a place of welcome, and that people should feel safe in their parishes, that families and parents should be able to have their kids there and have their kids go to youth group with their pastor and not ever have to worry. And I think that you know, women have a unique perspective on the importance of relationship and the importance of safety in the church. And I think you're seeing that in the overflow of interest in this letter. And I'm not sure if the Pope will answer, but I certainly hope this letter will be part of what shows him Catholics really want to know the truth.
ALEXANDRA DESANCTIS, Janet Smith, thank you both for your insight. Hope you'll come back sometime soon.
Absolutely, thank you.
To read or sign the letter to Pope Francis from Catholic women, signed by my guest tonight and thousands of others, visit CatholicWomen'sForum.org, CatholicWomen'sForum.org. Finally tonight, we need something uplifting. It's time for our story-entered segment. First, an announcement. I'm delighted to share with you the cover reveal of my latest Will Wilder book, the third in the series. It's called Will Wilder, The Amulet of Power. The cover captures the drama and the peril that Will faces himself in Book 3. This time he comes in contact with an amulet containing the locks of Samson, and as you can expect, trouble follows, and a good deal of miracles. There are also some amazing relics that are part of permanent collections in the real world. Adventure awaits. Will Wilder 3, The Amulet of Power, can be pre-ordered now at willwilderbooks.com or wherever books are sold. It premieres this February from Random House. And now my next guest is also an author. He's a poet, a scholar, teacher, and musician. Since 2000, he's taught U.S. history at a school here in Potomac, Maryland. His first book for children has just been released, Mr. Mehan's mildly amusing Mythical Mammals. And here to tell us about it is Mr. Mehan himself, Matthew Mehan. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Hey, okay, so why did you decide to write a children's book, and why one that really a picture book with very artful and at times difficult poems.
Yeah. Well, I am a teacher, and I've watched our SAT scores nationally go down every year. 2016 was another massive low.
Terrible.
And poetry is actually a kind of art form that has not been very popular over the last decades. And the only place you can find it is for children. So I wanted to sort of reintroduce a lot of the liberal arts and the sort of the classical learning of the Judeo-Christian heritage in a beautifully illustrated, sort of fun and delightful way, but one that asks children to take a step up.
No, and you do that. You do that. This really follows the spine that runs through the A, B, C, D, E, F depiction of all these fantastical creatures are the journey of Dali and Blug, who are two of your mythical mammals. Who are they? Why are they central to this?
Yeah, the letter D creature, the Dali, he has necktie ears that are blue and yellow, symbolizing he's a cheerful fellow, but he can become very sad at times with the blue. And the Blug is a big, fat yellow ball, like a giant floating sun with tiny little wings. And he is sort of a symbol of cheerfulness and whimsy, even a symbol of poetry and what it can do to sort of lighten the mind and lighten the mood when things are blue and things are down. And the two of them kind of go on a journey through a series of mythical mammals and learn to overcome the evil, the letter E creature, the evil of sadness through their friendship.
And where did you get these mythical mammals? It took you 10 years to put this book together.
Yeah, so, I mean...
Why not go with real animals, bizarre real animals?
There's a certain relief of the mind when you take off into whimsy and fantasy that is restful and delightful and amusing. And it allows you to introduce things that maybe are really common and need to be revisited, but you get bored by just someone lecturing you about, like, hey, be a good friend to other people. Well, then you flip the script and it's something fantastical and amusing, and it's another easier way to deliver those things.
You said in an interview that this attempts to aid in the formation of the human heart. How so?
I think that's the role of the poet in the city. I mean, I think that's the artist, is you shape passions. You can give an argument, and that's very good, and we've got a lot of theologians and philosophers and people laying that out, but also how to properly integrate those truths into your emotional life. That's something that we don't pay enough attention to, and that's something that's the poet's realm, is the human heart and shaping it. So a lot of the imaginative journey is reactions to things and helping people feel the right way about things.
Who were your biggest influences as you began down this journey? This is always scary to launch, particularly into children's lit, because as you know, you're a teacher, it's a moving target. Kids are a moving target. They're the most difficult and I think the most wonderful audience you can
You're
write
doing
for.
a good job. I mean, you've been after it.
It ain't easy.
Yeah, but well, the influences certainly Seuss, Shel Silverstein, Ogden Nash, Belloc, Chesterton, the sort of
Lewis Carroll.
Yeah, Lewis Carroll. I have an homage to him actually in the Blug painting. His illustrator Peter Tiniel's White Rabbit is sitting right there.
I saw that.
beneath Christ Church College, which is where he taught. So there's a lot of homages. I even have a kind of a reboot of the Jabberwocky called the Jargon Talkie, about sort of PC and manipulation of language, and how to put charity into everything you say.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of influences, but really at the end of the day, not that I don't aspire to this level, but Shakespeare, Moore, Chaucer, Dante, I studied the greats, and I wanted to deliver that in a it's more simplified form, but I wanted to try to practice those poetic arts and then give them to other people.
Now this is intended for 7 to 12-year-olds.
That's where you're forced to place it.
Yeah, but you have an author's note at the beginning, and you urge parents, adult readers, you say, I suggest that you try your best to become a child once more. Doing so will bring you through poetry's locked door. Now when you're ready, hold the book steady, raise your eyes from here, then reread the note that's truly true, the one to all children readers, which you thought perhaps was not addressed to you.
Exactly.
Why that?
Well, because there's a certain amount of disgust in a serious world for whimsy and imagination. And as a result, I think adults leave a lot of the cultural work of forming the next generation to people who we really shouldn't leave it to, frankly, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's also just when you want to enter into imagination and whimsy and poetry, there's a certain amount of pride you have to let go of. You have to play the fool. That was in the readings today. Was, you know, there's a certain foolishness that is true wisdom, and that's a lesson for adults as well as children.
Yeah, I'm glad I got the foolish part down. That's
That's
good.
right. We're good. We're good.
But let's talk for a moment. There's some questions I ask every author that sits in that chair. What is your favorite children's book and why?
That's a really hard and nasty question.
No, it's a
great question. My favorite children's book that I've ever read for myself would undoubtedly have to be Shel Silverstein's A Light in the Attic.
Oh.
When I read it, I was just like, what is this? This is ridiculous and hilarious and funny. And it made me think about poetry for children. As I got older, I started to realize we can do better in terms of the messages. And so I actually wrote this book as a kind of, you know, homage to Shel Silverstein in one sense, but also a kind of little nudge to a dear old uncle, like, hey, there's some other things that are really important we can do too.
Other things we need to talk about here. If you could choose a mentor, living or dead, who would that be?
Thomas More.
Thomas More.
Yeah, I did my dissertation on Shakespeare's play about Thomas More. I've studied him for a long time, and I realized he's actually a poet first. That was his training. And he, I think, brought the arts of poetry and rhetoric to the civilized world in a new way that helps with peace and friendship.
As an educator, as an author, what advice would you give to parents who are having a difficult time, particularly with their boys, getting them to read? What would you tell them practically to do in the short term?
One, digital fasting, right? Like the phones and the apps and the games, is that you have to create a space, right, for them to grow. And if there's too many brambles and thorns, they just won't grow the right kinds of flowers in that garden of the mind. But two, I tried to write a book that you can read that has puzzles and mysteries and challenges and search and find. There's a certain amount of saccharine literature that doesn't have the Will Wilder sort of adventure, like, hey, get after it. Putting that, especially with boys, I teach at all boys schools, you know, that sort of challenge and mystery. And then the other one is lay the stakes high. Say, hey, wisdom, you want to be a wise and good man. And that takes training and study and letters. And you want to do it artfully and wittily and wisely. So get after it. Read the best books from smart people. And that means a lot of reading and then reading the best as you go.
Final question I ask every author. Is there a story that changed your life, deepened it, and had a lesson in it that perhaps adjusted your path?
A children's book story?
Yeah, one you encountered when you were younger.
I think there's no doubt in my mind that I have to tag myself as part of the Middle-earth team of Hobbiton. Like The Lord of the Rings, and seeing that kind of nobility under duress made me see everything as a kind of heroic quest, which I think is really important.
Fantastic. Matt Mehan, thank you for being here. The book, Mr. Mehan's mildly amusing Mythical Animals by Matt Mehan, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Go get it for you and your family. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.